Terrifying true stories about Stockholm Syndrome. Hello lovely YouTube family, welcome back to Reality Binge. In today's video we're going to talk about the terrifying true stories about Stockholm Syndrome. Before we start, I would like you to hit that red subscribe button so you never miss out on any of our videos. Stockholm Syndrome is as tragic as it's complex. Victims suffer both the physical abuse of imprisonment and the severe emotional manipulation that locks them in place. Stockholm Syndrome is a condition in which a hostage or person in captivity develops a bond with their aggressor. This bond can range in simple feelings from empathy to the illusion of romantic interest. The name derives from August 1973 Norrmalmstorg robbery of Cretenbanken and the Norrmalmstorg in Stockholm, Sweden, in which gunmen held back employees captive for 6 days. Over these days, the hostages formed an alliance with the criminals. Psychologists have described Stockholm Syndrome as an extreme coping or survival mechanism against a hostile situation. Those rescued are said to be in a trance-like state wherein the concept of right and wrong were so muddled that the captivity became confronting. In cases where a person is held for years, it is the outside world that represents danger, uncertainty. Sealed doors signify safety. Here are 6 documented cases of terrifying true stories about Stockholm Syndrome. Number 6. Sean Hornbeck. 11-year-old Missouri resident Sean Hornbeck was riding his bike to a friend's house on October 6, 2002 when he was intentionally struck by an automobile. The driver, Michael John Delvin, jumped out, loaded Sean into the car, and took off. Police, firefighters, and volunteers combed the area for the missing child without success. 4.5 years later, another missing child, 13-year-old William Benjamin Obney, was found in Delvin's apartment, along with now teenage Sean Hornbeck. Delvin was arrested and charged with abduction. After his rescue, Sean told law enforcement that he freely went shopping in public, had a girlfriend, and browsed the internet, all while remaining under Devlin's watch eye. Asked why he never attempted to escape, Sean revealed that Devlin had instilled deep fear and threatened violence repeatedly, creating psychological barriers that kept him prisoner. Number 5. Patty Hearst. One of the most infamous kidnapping cases in history is that of the 19-year-old Patty Hearst, the granddaughter of publishing giant William Randolph Hearst. On the morning of February 4th, 1974, a group of gun-wielding domestic terrorists broke into Hearst's apartment at 2603 Bellevue Street in Berkeley, California. Hearst's fiancée was beaten up, and Hearst was thrown into a trunk of a car and driven away. The FBI soon learned that Hearst's abductors identified themselves as the Symbionese Liberation Army (SLA), and they were attempting to wage war with the United States. The group had already left carnage in their wake, and by their own admission, abducted the Harris for financial and political leverage. News of kidnapping dominated headlines. Then in April 1974, the case took an unexpected twist. Patty Hearst had joined her captors and announced their intention to be revolutionary. She even assisted in a bank robbery and started traveling around the country after a shootout between the SLA and Los Angeles police left SLA leader Donald DeFreeze dead. She was finally captured in San Francisco on September 18, 1973, charged with robbery and sentenced to 7 years in prison. In her defense, Hearst claimed to have been brainwashed. She served only 2 years before her sentence was commuted. She was later pardoned. Hearst's sensational tale is the subject of numerous films, documentaries, studies, and books, including Jeffrey Toobin's American Heiress, The Wild Saga of Kidnapping, Crimes, and the Trial of Patty Hearst. Number 4. Mary McElroy. On the evening of May 27, 1953, 25-year-old Mary McElroy was taking a bubble bath in her father's house when she was abducted by 4 men, including brothers George and Walter McGee. The men had broken into the house with a sawed-off shotgun and then waited for Mary to get dressed before taking her to an old farmhouse and chaining her to a wall in the basement. Mary, the daughter of Kansas City manager Henry F. McElroy, was a potential gold mine in ransom money. Realizing this, the men demanded $60,000 for Mary's release, but eventually settled for $30,000. The sum was paid May 29, 1933, and Mary was eventually unharmed near the Milbourne Golf Course. 3 of the men were captured less than a month later and sent to trial. However, Mary said that she was well cared for during the 29 hours in captivity. Apparently, one of the men even gave her flowers. When the trial concluded and all 3 men were given harsh sentences, Mary was riddled with guilt. She publicly sympathized with their abductors and called upon the governor of Guy Brashfield Park to reverse the sentence. Mary remained friends with the McGee brothers throughout their incarceration, visiting them in prison and bringing gifts. The ordeal led to multiple nervous breakdowns in Mary. After her father died in 1939, Mary's mental state collapsed. On January 21, 1940, she committed suicide with a pistol shot to the head. Part of her suicide note read, "My 4 kidnappers are probably the 4 people on earth who don't consider me an utter fool." Number 3. Elizabeth Smart. In her early mornings of the hours on June 5, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped from her bedroom in Salt Lake City, Utah. Her abductor, Brian David Mitchell, forced her onto a seemingly random hike for hours until they eventually stopped at a campsite. There, Smart was met by Mitchell's wife, Wanda Barzee, who made her undress. Mitchell performed a rudimentary marriage ceremony between himself and Smart, and then raped the young girl. Afterwards, she was chained to a tree and abused. Over the next 9 months, Smart was repeatedly sexually assaulted and psychologically molded into a submissive prisoner. Any instance of disobedience was met with threats of violence. Smart soon became a model captive and followed orders. Along with Mitchell and Barzee, Smart went on with many outings, sometimes to shop and other times to scavenge. During a trip to the library, Smart was even questioned by a police officer and chose not to reveal her identity or to scream for help. The trio moved 750 miles away to California, but Mitchell decided to uproot them once more and moved across the country to the East Coast. Smart appealed to Mitchell's self-proclaimed godliness and told him that they should return to Utah for spiritual reasons. Mitchell agreed, with the understanding that the idea had been his alone. Back in Utah, all three were recognized from the torrent of news broadcasts. Smart was pulled from her abductors and returned to her family. 7 years after the ordeal, she testified against Mitchell and Barzee. Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison. Barzee is serving 15 years. Number 2. Colleen Stan. In 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was hitchhiking to a friend's party near Red Bluff, California. She was picked up by a driving blue van with a child in the back seat. The presence of the child made the couple appear safe, but soon, the husband, Cameron Hooker, put a knife to Colleen's throat, drove to her deserted area, and then sexually assaulted and tortured her. Hooker's plan was to turn Colleen into a sex slave with the help of his wife, Jan. To make matters worse, Hooker built a coffin-sized box in which he held Colleen captive for 22 to 23 hours a day for the next 7 years. Colleen was subjected to cruel torture throughout her imprisonment. She was renamed Kay and called a piece of furniture. Hooker told Colleen that he worked for an organization called The Company that would hurt her if she disobeyed him. Ironically, the Hookers were loving and affectionate to their young daughter, and used this extreme contrast in their behavior to further manipulate Colleen. At one point, Hooker handed Colleen a gun and told her to stick it in her mouth and pull the trigger. Colleen complied, but the gun contained no bullets. It was a test of loyalty. In 1981, after nearly 4 years, Hooker took Colleen home to visit her family and left her there overnight. The Stans knew nothing of the abuse the daughter suffered, and Colleen did not inform them. Instead, when Hooker returned the following day, Colleen left them and resumed her life in the box for another 3.5 years. Thankfully, Jan Hooker eventually had a change in conscience and helped Colleen escape. Cameron Hooker was apprehended by the police, convicted of kidnapping and torture, and was sentenced to 104 years in prison on November 22, 1985. Number 1. Natasha Kampusch. While walking to school on March 2, 1988, 10-year-old Natasha Kampusch was grabbed by 2 men and thrown into a white van. Despite an exhaustive search of the area, police could find no trace of Natasha or her reputed kidnappers. For the next 8 years, Natasha was held prisoner in a cellar beneath the garage of a man named Wolfgang Prekipol. The cellar was 54 square foot, windowless, soundproof, and closed in by a concrete and steel door. Initially, Natasha was not permitted to leave the room, but as time went on, she was invited to spend time in other parts of the house. She was left alone in the cellar during the day, while Perkolov worked. In the following years, Natasha was given additional freedoms as part of the pact that she would stay silent about her captivity. Each morning, Natasha and Prekipol had breakfast together, living a distorted version of normalcy, but Prekipol countered his niceties by beating and sexually assaulting Natasha. All the while maintaining the doors and windows of the house were rigged with explosives. On random occasions, Natasha tried to attract the attention of outsiders, but was unsuccessful. Finally, on August 23, 2006, she managed to slip away. She had been vacuuming Piccoli's BMW under his supervision when the phone rang. Piccoli left Natasha unattended while he took the call. Leaving the vacuum running, she took off into the streets and found a neighbor who called the police. Once Natasha had been in police protection, Piccoli realized that he would likely be convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. To avoid this, he jumped in front of a moving train near the YN Nord station in Vienna. When Natasha was informed of Piccoli's death, she wept and even demanded to sit alone in his coffin for hours. Years after the escape, she still carried a photo of him in her wallet. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, so you never miss any amazing video from us.